Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Zero number Z950. I have a left hand and a right hand here. Got the left hand, we've got the right hand. We're going to, in this video, go over both hands. Quite frankly, I don't want to make two videos, one for each hand. Let's just go over this. So this is this is what's called a cam lift hinge. Cam lift. And cam lift hinges are used when you have acoustically rated openings. I can't say that I see them installed in other applications. I see them in openings in door assemblies that are an engineered assembly, meaning all of the components have been tested together to achieve a specific STC rating. And the 950, the Z950 from Zero, is one of a small handful of different hinges that they offer for these applications. So when you look in the Zero catalog, you'll see a Z950 or a cam lift hinge alongside other parts that have been tested with a specific type of door and frame construction, and generally discussion about wall construction as well. So the purpose of a cam lift hinge is that it will literally we have the left hand here. We literally take the door, and the door will literally lift up as it swings out. It lifts up as it opens. The purpose of that is because of the preparation on the hinge. When the door is coming into the closing cycle, the very weight of the door itself serves the purpose of creating as positive a seal as it can against the face of the door and the gasketing, and the STC rated gasketing. That's what a cam lift hinge is for. The good news is that you generally don't require any special templating for a cam lift hinge, because your door literally does open up and go out like that. But of course I'm exaggerating it thoroughly here, and it doesn't open up very much at all. And I don't believe that you're going to unless you were someone like me, or maybe someone like yourself who sells door hardware, or installs door hardware, or specifies it, and you go through a set of doors with cam lift hinges, I don't believe that if you're not realizing it, you're not going to think to yourself, oh, it took more force to open that. I was recently in Manhattan and attending a show on Broadway, and exit doors, yeah, those are cam lift hinges on those doors, is what they have, because those are acoustically rated openings, is why they have those there. And when I demonstrate the hinge, and here's a Z950, your first impression is, wow, that's a big hinge. And it is, because it is. As I take that leaf, and if you watch, they're basically flush at this time. And when I take that leaf and I rotate it to 90 degree, or pardon me, to 180 degree, it's offset a bit. When it comes down to 90 degree, it's not so much of an offset anymore, but nonetheless, that door leaf, as you can tell, is a little bit higher than the frame leaf. Okay, so getting your door out to 90 degree is going to result in that height of the door actually increasing, but not substantially. I mean, how many times will you open one of these to 180 degree? You really won't, in my opinion. But as I almost unintentionally demonstrated, not only it's a two-knuckle hinge, and two-knuckle hinges are inherently handed, and that's because one leaf needs to carry the load, of the door, and that's why these are handed hinges. Okay, you can indeed lift them off, so you need to be mindful of that. Although, from an exterior perspective, you're not going to lift that door off of the hinges at all. That wouldn't be permissible. You would need that door open to be able to lift that off. So this is a larger than their standard version. Do a little bit of a visual tour of the hinge. I don't know where these are manufactured. I don't know if Zero actually manufactures these in their plant. Don't know, not that it doesn't matter, it's just I've been to a factory that manufactures hinges, and I walked away with a very realigned appreciation for how involved it is making hinges. So I don't know if they get into making hinges themselves or if it's coming from some OEM. Now, I think the thing to do is take a couple of, take another look at this hinge. This is going to be a 5 by 4.5. So let's talk about that height. That 5-inch height, that immediately tells me that we're dealing with a heavy door, because it's a 5-inch tall hinge, and that it is, it's, I'm looking for the leaf thickness. I don't see it, but we'll get to it. You're going to see a 5-inch tall hinge when you are dealing with heavier doors. Acoustically rated doors can be heavier. Regular steel doors can be heavier as well. You'll see 5-inch called into play when you're dealing with doors 3'6" and wider. I don't know the size of these doors or the weight of what they are, but you can very often see assembled acoustically rated assemblies installed where it's not a traditional door in that regard. This door will lead you into some sort of a room, into some sort of an acoustically rated box for all intents purposes. And when you're dealing with these acoustically rated assemblies, the weight can become quite substantial. These hinges are rated at 500 pounds, is what you would hang this door with. And the fact that it's 5-inch tall serves that weight, but also serves when it's a wider door or when the volume is higher versus just a 4.5-inch tall hinge. So when I see a hinge that's 5-inch tall, you don't just elect to use 5-inch tall because you like 5-inch height. You're doing so for a reason. It's heavier, it's wider, it's a combination of both. It's heavier, it's wider, it's high volume, or a combination of all of those. I just did a project of just a 3-foot, a 3070 active and a 2070 inactive, unequal pair of doors, relatively low volume, except they were 14 gauge steel stiffened doors. So yeah, we're going to use a 5-inch heavyweight hinge. I think what I'd like to do is switch to the screen view so we can take a look at the extended description and further dissect this hinge. So this is the item that we're looking at, the Z950, just a factory original image here. It is a mortise type hinge. We'll talk about that, and that it is left-handed. Obviously, this video is going to serve as left and right hand, and the right hand version of that is just simply going to be okay, would have to spell the word right correct to begin with. Okay, right hand. Also, of course, for right hand reverse and left hand reverse. So we have it in the sight in all of those, in all 4 of those handings. And it's obviously important to know the hand of the door, so that your door doesn't. You try to hang your door and the door doesn't immediately fall out of the opening. There's a handing chart here for you to review. This is something I literally made probably in 1990 on a PC program called Arts and Letters. It was some sort of drawing program is what it was that allowed you to do odd fonts and things like that. Anyway, the handing is here, so be sure to refer to that and order the hinge correctly. This is the way in which we're defining the hand of the door. Material 1020 stainless steel precision investment cast. This is 630 or US 32D. That means 2 things. It means it's made of solid stainless and that it has a brushed finish. Brushed stainless steel represents the most durable of all finishes. It's called a natural finish because the base material of the item is not altered in any way. There's nothing happening to it except that it's being brushed to have a satin finish. Okay. You could also probably do these in polished. I don't know that Zero offers these in polished. I would imagine they have the capability of providing them in polished chrome, and they may offer them in polished, in polished stainless, not polished chrome. This is a 5 by 4.5 by 0.25. So I'm going to take my caliper out and put it on the leaf of the hinge and tell you if it is indeed 0.250 thick. My caliper tells me it's 0.242. So yeah, 242. The other leaf, 0.238 is what I'm coming up with. So yeah, a little bit shy on a 1/4 inch, but nonetheless, I think that would be considered within range. Door rating 500 pounds, 500-pound door when you're using a 1.5. It's going to include 1224 by 3/4 machine screws. I'll show you the machine screws later in this video. At 180-degree opening, it's going to lift the door 5/16 of an inch, and we'll measure that when we get to that point as well. What they're basically saying is the distance from here to here, obviously. Pin, hardened tool steel, hardened and chrome finished to Rockwell C60. That's a hardness scale reference to meet that ANSI spec. Now this is important. The minimum clearance at the head of the frame is 3/16. For doors greater than 1 3/4 thick, and it's very likely that they will be when you're dealing with acoustically rated material, you'll have to increase that to 1/4 inch. Now that is really incredibly important because you have a door, okay, let's say that you're using a Steelcraft hollow metal door, and those hinges are at 7 3/8 from here to here. 7 3/8, 7/0 would be 39 5/16, and then 71 1/4. That's based on having an 1/8 of an inch margin between the top of the door and the underside of the header. So if you're using acoustically rated material, you better take that into account. You're going to need to hold your hinge location shy a 1/16 of an inch when prepping the door to account for that. You don't want to get into that situation where you're using stock material and then cam lift hinges because they require a margin greater than standard. Note, for the Z950 and 9500, screws must be engaged no less than 0.35 in your steel reinforcement. Now that's because of what the hinge is rated for. It's rated for a door of a particular weight, and you must use the fasteners that are provided, and you'll note that they're longer than the standard 1224 hinge screw. And as we continue on here, for use in EMI, RFI, and sound insulating doors using acoustical seals, so radio frequency and electromagnetic interference, you could easily have doors that are or rooms that have a specific type of copper sort of insulating material to keep radio waves from penetrating. And again, the purpose of the cam lift is to increase that contact with the gasketing, so it's used in those applications. Cam action greatly improves the sealing characteristics along the perimeter door, lifting and lowering the door with the swing. Cam lift hinges will not bind door standards. They will not bind door standards. I'm not sure exactly what that statement means, except that you're really not going to encounter a major problem at all with hardware. A lot of hardware that we deal with has a small amount of vertical tolerance to it, because doors do kind of sag with time, and this is not in that regard necessarily different than a door that it has a sagging problem when it comes to a closer or an overhead stop, things of that nature, exit devices. When the door is coming to the closed position, everything else will line up, your strike plate preparations, your latch bolt preparation, etc. Tested with the 4041 LCN closer, so determined to be not so substantial of a closing force as a response to the cam lift spiral cut on the barrel, that it would overwhelm that door closer operating safely. The handing chart we've gone over. Let's take a look at the product brochure. And this is going to be an enlightening document because it will show us the series that they have of these cam lift hinges. Okay, the Z955, that's the one that I typically bump into the most. It's not necessarily, there's nothing really that is outrageous about it in terms of its thickness. You know, it's a standard thickness unit. Okay, and it's rated for up to 200 pounds, which would be pretty typical when it comes to butt hinges, even though I like to really stop thinking about butt hinges a little bit before that. But nonetheless, 200 pounds is what the standard Z955 is going to handle. You get up to something a little bit heavier weight, a heavyweight hinge that would be 5-inch tall, the Z953. And you'll see that we jump up in the weight rating. So at the Z950, we're at a 500-pound door. And then that Z9500, which is not shown here at all. Let's take a look and see if we have a template of that Z9500. I've had a client, I don't know if I sold him material for his door or not, I don't recall, but he came into, you can see how costly those are. He came into some of these hinges for like $30 each or something ridiculous like that. And, you know, speaking to the manufacturer, I did determine that we were accurate in, or at least my suspicion was, the only difference between the Z950 and the Z9500 is literally only the size of the fastener that's involved and the countersinking that's been done to the hinge plate itself. So in that 950, you're going to use the Z255, the 7255Z. Actually, you're probably going to use the 7250Z. This screw here. You're going to go up to the Z9500. You're going to go with this 5/16 bolt, substantially thicker. I don't know the percentage of it being a greater diameter or circumference, but it's substantial. A couple of technical drawings that are here as well, and they somewhat allude to the difference. You can see how large that countersink there is on the 9500. But the Z950, it just doesn't appear to be as large, is what I'm driving at. Okay. So, larger prep, larger screw. That's going to be the primary difference between these two units. Okay, let's move that up. Move that over. Okay, so now back to the item that we are indeed looking at here. You can see that we've got 4 different types. Okay, we talk about the weight range of each of them, the lift amount that will happen on each of them as well, the different fasteners that are involved, and then the specifications of the hinge that we've gone over already. These are all 4 full mortise hinges. We can talk about that as well. Speaking of full mortise hinges, because it's on the same cut sheet, they do, Zero does offer stainless steel hinges as well, not related to acoustical attenuation, but you know, if you are looking to use hinges from a single manufacturer, they do make stainless base material hinges, steel base material, actually it'd be a brass base material on this, although they say steel dull chrome. They shouldn't use 626 here. That means brass base material. I imagine they should use 652, and that would mean steel base material. in a satin chrome finish. And then 600, that would mean, I actually don't know if that means specifically steel. Let's take a look. And we're going to check on that, what 600 refers to. Being a bit of a stickler for finishes, contact us, and then video gallery. And we're going to get to page 2. And we're going to type in BHMA, Builders Hardware Manufacturers Association, their finish chart. So 600 literally means steel base material. So when Zero says steel dull chrome, but call it 626, that's no good, because 626 means satin chrome over brass or bronze, but 652 is satin chrome over steel. So I suspect that it's actually 652 that they're working with on these two hinges. Word to the wise. 626 would tell us brass base material, and that's not what it is. Although the good news is you'd be able to use these on fire-rated doors, whereas 626 you couldn't at all. Okay. The balance of the product brochure that's here just talks more about hinges, obviously continuous hinges, etc. from Zero. Here we go. Now, let's switch back to the camera view and work towards wrapping up this video. Before we do that, however, let's take note of the manufacturer's page here. When you fire that up, you'll be able to see not only all of the Zero products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to their most current catalog. Other encyclopedic documents would be here, and this page is the repository for that material. Let's wrap up this video on camera. Now, bringing this in for a landing, so to speak. So here's our hinge, and we were going to talk about what the offset was, or the amount of lift that occurred. I wanted to show that to you on camera. Then also talk about the what makes it a full mortise hinge. .259. So 0.259. 0.259. I don't recall the lift that it said in the product brochure. Let's take a look at that. It says 5/16 at 180 degree opening. So I'm definitely short of that. You know, it's probably because I get the, I've got some grinding runoff here. That's obviously going to have everything to do with it. The backside doesn't seem to be as extreme. Let's try the other side, and obviously this is not super accurate. Yeah, 5/16. It's going to be 5/16. If we were able to simply, measure this horizontal line and this horizontal line, it'll be 5/16. And this is your left hand, so this is going to be good for a left hand if you're on the outside and I'm on the inside, okay? Or it'll be good for a right hand reverse. It's going to be the same hinge. You're on the outside now, and I'm on the inside. And as we're also looking at this hinge, I can show you the fasteners. And this is a 1224 by 3/4, but it's not a flat, it's not an undercut head. The underside of that head, a normal hinge screw, a normal machine screw for a hinge, when it's 134 thousandths or even 180 thousandths, it's going to come down and then be undercut. That's because the thickness of the material that you're trying to get the flat head to is so thin that a flat head, the height of the head alone, won't sit flush, so they'll undercut them. But this hinge leaf, at its 0.25 thickness, doesn't require that. Those smaller hinges are going to require those undercut head. They also have wood screws included here as well. Okay, that's your fastener package. Looks like some of them are stainless and some of them are not. Yeah, the wood screws are stainless. The machine screws are not stainless steel. And I've had this conversation with the factory in the past. You know, my position was, well, if you're selling a stainless hinge, to have disparate material between base hinge and screw is atypical. It would be like assuming that steel hinges would have brass screws or brass hinges would have steel screws, and that mixture would be normal. And ultimately, the factory said that's just the way we do it. Okay, so be mindful. The machine screws are not going to be stainless on these, except possibly that screw used in the Z950. So coming up with some stainless 1224 flathead screws and 3/4 inch length, we can provide that. It would be something outside. It was more of an intellectual curiosity why they would supply non-stainless steel screws with a hinge. That's just the way they do it. Now, let me show you the right hand. Okay. That's going to be, of course, the opposite hand of what we're dealing with. And these leaves are all stamped so the people in the factory know what they're dealing with. RRLL. And so that you on the job site know what you're dealing with as well. Okay. Again, same scenario. Stainless will be marginally magnetic if it's not been passivated when it's been worked and machined. Now, what makes it a full surface hinge, pardon me, a full mortise hinge, what makes it a full mortise hinge is this, what we'd call the swag line, right here, this bend, right here where I'm touching, where the leaf goes here and then back out. That makes it full surface, pardon me, full mortise. That means when the leaves are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortise flush to the edge of the door and frame. And if you were to dive deeper into the world of hinges for acoustically rated openings, you will certainly see a variety of options available to you in that regard. I want to make sure they go back in the proper box. I don't want to have our client, you know, here, you do all the right-hand doors and you do all the left-hand doors, and then they have one hinge that's funny happening to them. We don't want that. Nice quality hinge. They're not the only people who manufacture cam lift hinges, although I couldn't say that there's several sources that I'm aware of. But the name Zero is synonymous with acoustically rated gasketing. Gasketing used for acoustically rated openings. And if you're looking, customers will call up and say, yeah, I want some, you know, I want some STC rated gasketing. Okay, so let's do that. So the way to go about doing it is to quite easily look at a manufacturer's deployment of acoustically rated gasketing and then using all of the pieces that they have tested together, including the cam lift hinges. Zero's not the only people who make it, that's to be sure, but Zero's name is quite synonymous with that line. If you think of Zero, you may think that they do only acoustically rated material, because if you order an acoustically rated door and frame, you are probably going to be supplied with Zero gasketing, Zero gaskets, and potentially the hinges as well, depending on what the door exactly is. But the client who calls up and says they want this material, after we get into the conversation a little bit, you start to realize what is actually required. Okay, acoustically rated. Is the door rated? No, not really, but it's 1 3/4 solid core. Okay, I get it. It's not rated. But what you're saying is that it has some inherent sound deadening properties. Sure it does. The frame, the wall, is any of that treated for acoustical attenuation? No, it's not, but I'm trying to keep the sound out. Then you're able to go down a path to say, okay, what we want to do is use material that's possibly used in acoustical assembly, but we're not going to hit a specific STC rating because we can't, because the rest of the components that are existing can't. You know, someone who lives in an apartment building and just don't want to hear the elevator door opening and closing. Got it. Next is someone who's doing an amateur sound studio where they have done a lot of research and they're building material. They're using standard building materials to their best way possible to really deaden the sound. And they've done some research into gasketing. So that kind of person will generally stop short of spending the huge amount of money that an acoustically rated assembly of gasketing and hinges would require to just get the best bang for their buck. And then, of course, there are facilities like Broadway. I said to someone earlier, and I may have said in this video, if you're in Manhattan on Broadway, you know, I did say it, you know, I don't know that they were the Z950 hinges, but they were definitely, they were very likely this hinge. Obviously, a very loud environment, obviously an environment where you need to control sound, or the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Everything that's happening in there is acoustically engineered. So it depends on really where you fall in terms of how far you have to take it. Before we wrap this video up, I did want to talk about the sizing of hinges. Now this hinge is 5 by 4.5. It is incredibly important to know that the height is the first dimension on this hinge. The width is the second dimension. Okay? Why is that important? Because we need to understand how we're prepping our door and frame. We've talked about how that gap at the top of the door needs to be accommodated, needs to accommodate the requirements of the hinge, having an extra 1/16 of an inch. Because the hinge is rectangular, it's important to know what dimension is first. When it comes to hinges like this, or I should say, when it comes to full mortise hinges, the height is the first dimension. Why is that the case? Whereas with doors, the width is the first dimension. I like to think of it as what dimension is actually the one that I want you to tell me first. You know, don't tell me some news and then tell me something that's out of context first. Tell me that and then tell me the supporting information. And in my mind, when it comes to a hinge, tell me the height first, because that is really telling me a lot about the door. You telling me it's a 5-inch tall hinge. Okay, I'm automatically thinking there's something unusual about this door. My mind is being set in that sort of direction, so to speak. So I'm thinking heavy door, wide door, high volume door, and then I hear the rest of it, 4.5. Okay, I'm dealing with an 1 3/4 thick door. Okay, so now I've been able to focus in on, but telling me it's 4.5 wide first, I'm thinking, okay, so is most other hinges in the world. What's special about that? Oh, it's a 5-inch tall. Oh, why didn't you tell me that first? Same with a door. Tell me it's 7 foot first? No. Tell me the width, 3 foot. So I think that might be the way that it's done. It just strikes me as important. There was one time that the understanding of height and width and the order in which they are used on hinges was less clear than it is today. I did a project for the University of Chicago, University of Illinois at Chicago. We had about 20 doors, and 2 of them were 3'6" or 4-foot doors. The spec called out for 5 by 4.5. Well, I made the doors and frames 4.5 inch because I'm thinking, oh, it's 5 by 4.5. I was thinking they were sized the same way as hinges. And then I sent out wide throw hinges. I sent out hinges that were 4.5 tall and 5 wide. And client calls and said, these 2 openings don't meet the specifications. And I, of course, looked at the paperwork and said, no, it matches. No, I definitely sent you 4.5 by 5. He's like, yeah, you definitely sent me 4.5 by 5. And then it started to come clear to me. And I don't recall what I did, but I got clarification that I had the understanding of hinges backwards. And I had been working in the industry for maybe a year at that point. It was, or longer. It was quite humbling. And it made me realize how long you can go with an understanding of general ignorance in terms of how things actually work, how things actually are defined. And at the end of that project, basically speaking to the contractor, you're right, those are wrong. The doors and frames are wrong. The frames were already set, and they were set in masonry. And, you know, the logic was, we won't use the logic was the client simply agreed to accept the 4.5 inch tall standard weight hinges because that's how the doors and frames were prepped. We got them non-wide throw hinges, and the logic was, you know, that's what the spec called out. These doors are hardly, if ever, used, and they were whatever the width was, and they were not unusual in terms of the weight. They were 3.6 or 4.0 or maybe 3.8, but they were very low volume use. You know, they said Yeah, we don't have to make this an issue, rip the frames out. So I dodged a major bullet there, and I have subsequently learned how hinges are defined in terms of the sizing. Well, this is the school of hard knocks that we're in. Now, in terms of the width, that's also a very important sort of characteristic to think about. And when you're dealing with a cam lift hinge, like in that example in Manhattan, existing construction, okay, that would be a century and a half plus old, could be. You need to think about the width of the hinge. So the height's important, but now the width. The width is important because you need to make sure that the vertical axis of pivoting is where it needs to be to accommodate the requirements of the opening. What I mean to say is this. If you have a steel frame and it is wrapping over a partition wall, and there's no chair rail, there's no molding applied, that vertical axis of pivoting is going to be out far enough for that door to go 180 degrees. But if you have some sort of clearance to think about, now you have to worry about, or now you have to calculate, is 4.5 inch an adequate width of hinge, giving me where my vertical axis of pivoting is, so that when the door goes to 90, probably not a big deal, but if it goes past that, is the vertical axis of pivoting over far enough to get around what I need to get around when my door comes in here? So that formula for determining the width of the hinge is simply this. It's the door thickness minus the back set, plus your clearance plus your inset. No, sorry. Door thickness minus your back set times 2 plus your clearance plus your inset. So in an example of door thickness, 1.75 inches probably. Although with this it could be different. 1.75 inches minus your hinge back set, which is the amount of the door that the hinge leaf does not occupy. You know, generally you'd have a 1/4 inch back set. Your door would not be fully cut out. Even in a reversible hollow metal door with handing plates, there's still a 1/4 inch back set that's involved there. So door thickness, 1.75 inches minus back set, 1.5 inches times 2 is 3 inch, plus your clearance. The clearance would be the dimension from the face of the frame to where the door is going to reside when the door is at 180 degrees. That space inside of there. You add that plus your inset. The clearance is easy to get our head around. Imagine the door open and parallel to the face of the wall. How much is in there? Is there some sort of brick molding? Is there chair rail? Is the frame set in deep into the wall? You could have a 14-inch masonry wall, Manhattan example applicable, and you could have a 5 3/4 frame, but it's set back 3 inches. And your client says, yeah, I want to get those doors to 180 degree and hold them open. Whoa, now you got to think about what is our dimension. So in that if the clearance is 3 inch, let's define the inset. If you stand on the pull side of the door and run your hand over the face of the door and the face of the frame, you know the door is not exactly flush with the face of the frame. It's scooched in a little bit, like 3/32 of an inch. It could be flush. It could also be a 14-inch deep frame, and your doors are in the center of that, and they're inset several inches. So in the standard hollow metal, to keep this example simple, 1.75 inches minus 1/4 inch times 2 is 3 inch, plus our clearance of 3 inch, plus our inset of 3/32, that would be just over 6 inch in this fictional example. You go to the next largest size is the way that this works, and you would find, well, they don't make 6.5 inch wide throw hinges. 7 inch would be the wide throw hinge that the textbook tells me I need. Whoopsie, they don't make cam lift hinges in wide throw. So you probably shouldn't worry about that in the sense of running into that application, but there are rules when it applies to cam lift hinges. You're restricted in the height. You've got to account for that. It's an unusual thickness. A 1/4 inch leaf thickness, I think, is what this is, right? Yeah, it is. It actually slightly shy on 1/4 inch. But think of all of these things. I was at a DHI class last year, and the moral of the story of the teacher was, if you're detailing the job, you know, your client says, here, give me these doors, these frames, this hardware. Great, 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 great. You've got the plans. The moral of the story was, look at the installation instructions. If you were to look at the installation instructions, or at least the cut sheet on the cam lift hinge, you would say, wow, minimum clearance at head of frame is 3/16. And for doors greater than 1 3/4, it's 1/4 inch. I got off really easy learning the lesson of height and width. You're not going to get off that easy on a cam lift error because, you know, it's not going to work because you don't have enough margin. The door will get open to the point where over here at the hinge, the top of the door is now hitting the underside of the header, and buzzing off a 1/16 of an inch off the top of the door is not realistic and probably not possible whatsoever. Anyway, the name Zero is synonymous with acoustical rated equipment for doors. They have regular weather stripping stuff as well. I would very much encourage you to review their product catalog. And I will say this, we don't do there are other manufacturers of hardware that we do substantially in greater volume than Zero, but it's kind of because Zero material is a bit of a specialty in the sense that they specialize in the specialty products. But it's also because of price, because of the fact that the solutions in the Zero catalog are engineered solutions that other manufacturers don't even look into. When it comes to automatic door bottoms, if you're asking the weather strip salesman what they would use in their own house, I would severely consider Zero material for solutions because of how it's engineered. It's not cheap. That's not the market they're going after. Solving problems is the market that they're going after. I would encourage you to review their product. They are under the umbrella of Allegion. Their Zero sister companies would be companies like Schlage, LCN, Von Duprin, Glenn Johnson, Ives, many other people. Very good technical support. I literally, during this video, called the factory to confirm the difference. Spoke to a gentleman who said, I've got an expert on that, hold the phone. The expert came to the phone and just, boom, over the fence the first time. Great response, and I appreciate that. And that's what it takes. Any questions? If you have any questions on the Z950 cam lift hinge from Zero or any other Zero product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.